So I'm going to give a little background in how I got off the grain habit. I grew up in Montana and South Dakota. I'm a daughter of a cattle buyer with a very long history in really seeing the evolution of beef production in the western United States. My dad was a World War II vet. He was a paratrooper. He had a 10th grade education, and after the war, he came back to the United States and began buying cattle. And he really saw the evolution of us transferring from a pure grass-fed to a highly grain-fed market. And actually even saw the evolution of how that happened over time. When I was a little girl, I would go with him and buy cattle on ranches, in mostly cow-calf pairs, and then we would take those calves and put them on a train, and they would go to other places to pretty much finish on grass, maybe a little bit of grain. Then in about 1980, we moved from Montana, which is a highly grass country, to South Dakota. And the purpose was to be in a place where we could buy cattle that was from the northern Great Plains and bring them to the burgeoning Nebraska Ogawa Aquifer feedlots. And then the evolution went even further when we ended up buying a lot of cattle, a lot of dairy cattle from Canada. So we moved to the Pacific Northwest and would do the cattle trade from California, again, highly feedlot-based, and the Canadian market. This is my first club calf steer, and it was the only one that I actually was able to really choose myself. I liked the color, and I didn't do very well, and it's a Simmental, and the reason why I love this is that my family, on my mother's side, came from Semin Valley, Switzerland, and they were cheesemakers in Minnesota. And so this Simmental is named after my family's name, Obi. So as you can see, these animals are huge. So this was a Grand Champion steer, and this was during the 80s when cattle started looking a bit more like horses than cattle in terms of the length of their legs. And here's my final steer, Theodore, and I had a picture so I always had to have these also in carcass contests, which makes me pretty tough in a way. So this animal was a 1,600-pound animal. That is a very large beast, and it had a prime carcass. It definitely was fed on grain and would be incredibly inefficient on grass. So here is what the animals, like a Grand Champion steer, would look like in the 60s or 70s compared to this. So the industry has changed greatly, at least in the United States, from going from Hereford and Angus, the English breeds, to really having the more continental breeds. But my dad really did have an amazing ability to track the market and really see what kind of animals the market demanded. So here is one of the better feedlots in the Pacific Northwest. And what I think is very interesting about it is that, one, they're using water to keep the dust down. But if you look far in the foreground, we have some sagebrush grassland. This land that is now completely rested pretty much. There's no grazing animals on it. It used to be some of the finest grassland in North America. So how did I become a cattle buyer's daughter and going against the grain. So the first thing is that I went to a feedlot and I saw cattle not eating grain, but Twinkies. Do you all know what Twinkies are? They're like little cakes, lemon cakes, sort of, with cream in them. What's even worse is that they were in the wrappers. And so I started thinking, well, grain isn't that bad, but what are we really feeding? And about the same time, the company Iowa Beef Packers was bought by Tyson, which was a major chicken grower in the United States. And one of the reasons is because they needed to get rid of their chicken litter. And so that is, for a while, has been fed to cattle. So then I read Pasture Perfect. I was really grossed out by the model. And I was really taken by the idea of how can we have this nutrient-dense food, and why do we ruin it with grain? In the best case, when we feed them corn and soybeans, really. So I started exploring the Stockman grass farmer, and then I was convinced. I was very convinced that there has to be a way. And so I began exploring with other producers how to do purely grass-finished beef, and was the director for Conservation Beef, which was a nature conservancy program, and then started our own grass-fed beef program, Beyond Organic Beef, exclusively grass-fed beef, which we still have today. So the values that were behind me going against the grain, number one was holistic management and the power of harvesting solar energy. So as I began ranching, I wasn't raising cattle for a market other than selling in the commodity market, but I wasn't finishing animals. But I really started seeing what is the potential of really being able to expand the resource base. I saw that there was less work in it, letting animals just do what they normally do. And I started traveling the world, and I started getting a better multicultural idea of people's relationship to their animals and to their food. And also understanding that it's really respectful to eat what you're served when you're in somebody's home. And also the platinum rule, which, the golden rule is treat how you would like to be treated, but starting to think about treating people and other animals like they want to be treated. And I think that there's nothing more natural than a cow eating grass. So the one thing in holistic management that we look at is the chain of production. And one is the resource conversion. Are we capturing as much sunlight energy as possible? Do we have big leafed grasses? Do we have a lot of ground cover? Then there's product conversion. We have the resources, but that we really need to have a marketable product. And then the money conversion. Do we have a product that we can take to market? So when we in the beef industry were focusing on these animals, we were definitely looking at the product conversion. We were looking at ways to increase production, increase yield, and really I think that focus of genetics, of all these inputs are really kind of a marketing scam in a way. And if we focus instead on converting sunlight energy and using photosynthesis, and then creating great products from that to bring to the market, to give people the most nutritious beef possible, that is where we need to go. But so there's a problem. So these are our beef cattle now. And as I said, the larger animals, most of the beef that you can find in the United States are really from genetics that come from these very large animals. And they're not really accustomed to grazing. Luckily, for some reason, northeastern Oregon has been left off of the path in many ways. And so we have these great animals that look a lot like that 4-H steer from the 60s or 70s. And it's amazing to see these guys compared to some of the larger ones graze. We also do some custom grazing for other people that have, the more modern genetics for the commodity market. And these guys, they know their genetics are, they know what their genetics are, and they know that they are happiest eating grass. So I also have been in the dairy goat business, and I just want to think about the genetics of those animals, of cattle and of dairy. I have 2 experiences where I have bought dairy goats, and they were always fed grain, and they did not know how to eat grass. And these goats, which have a great habitat here, what I noticed is that through the year, when they would have kids, they would teach their kids to eat different things, and their milk tasted significantly different. And if they were on like a tamed pasture or fed grain, there was kind of that goaty taste into the milk. Another example is there's a very large dairy, a cow dairy in Oregon, and when the cows don't produce enough, they sell the cows quite cheap. And a friend of mine, Corey Carmen, bought one of these cows, and for one thing, it took some bum calves right away, which was remarkable, and because she was never really allowed to have her calf. But it took her a whole year to figure out how to graze. Here's some of our cattle grazing with windrows for winter feed. And again, so it's looking at the resource conversion and the money conversion. That is where we need to go in order to get off grain. So I just want to get into some numbers for a little bit. Some people would say, well, you can't feed the world with just grain-fed animals. So this is in a United States context, so please bear that in mind. So as a grass-fed producer, I want to make sure that I can create a product that's not niche, that anybody with any income really can afford. So we have some assumptions here. So in the United States, we have 75% degraded land, and most of that land is grassland. The total grazed acres available in the US is 762 million. I believe that degraded land really needs properly managed livestock in order to restore it. So if we're going to finish to a similar weight, no cropland converted, and an average of about 6.5 months longer to bring them to the same weight that they would in a feedlot, no forage inputs from crop residues, the 27 million cattle finished in feedlots, they take about 145 days on feed. So that would be 340 days harvested off the nation's 762 million acres. So a little math here, 1 stock day is for a 1,000-pound animal, not that 1,600-pound steer, and about 30 pounds of dry matter per day. 39 head get enough to eat on 1 acre a day, is what that would mean. So to finish 27 million cattle that are in feedlots, we need to add 12 more head per acre per day. So the basic conclusion here is that the nation's grazing land would have to absorb a 31% increase in stocking rate. So in holistic management, we typically see with properly managed livestock that there is about a doubling. So increasing 31% is a simple scenario. So to compete on a price basis, so if feeder and live cattle are within 10 cents of each other, and corn is $6, $6.50 a bushel, then grass-fed can compete on a cost per pound basis. But that does assume the same slaughtering costs, which in the United States is a huge factor. We have very much consolidated feedlot operations with our packing industry, and the ability to have economical slaughter facilities is a big issue for us. Yet, this is the area that used to be some of the greatest grassland, and as you can see, much of it that is not in wheat is fallow and degraded. So a few years back, when we saw skyrocket prices of corn and feeder trading at about $13 premium for live cattle, feeders were losing about $70 per head. And when the corn was even higher, about $200 a head. To me, I don't think that is really a sustainable system for the beef industry in the United States, and probably not here either. So one thing that I think that is encouraging is that what we have is the ability with cattle to easily convert to grass-based, much easier than some of the other, well, of course, it's much more difficult for the confinement operations of hogs and chickens. Thank you.